King Leonidas walked into a canyon knowing his army would die there, and chose it anyway. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't bravery in the way Hollywood sells it. Leonidas made a calculated decision under incomplete information, with a clear-eyed count of the cost. In 480 BCE, the Persian Empire under Xerxes mobilized somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 soldiers to invade Greece. The Spartans sent 300 hoplites to Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to buy time. So what information did Leonidas actually have? His scouts reported the Persian force was massive, larger than anything Greece had fielded. His options were three: surrender the pass immediately, fight and lose in hours, or fight and lose in days. Every path led to the same outcome. Sparta's 300 would die. The question wasn't whether they'd survive. It was whether their deaths could reshape the political calculation for the rest of Greece. This is where the Stoic framework enters. The Stoics, who came later, but whose philosophy crystallizes what Leonidas already understood, taught that you control only your choices and effort, never outcomes. Leonidas couldn't control whether Persia would invade. He couldn't control the size of their army, but he could control whether he showed up, where he stood, and how long he held the line. The pass itself was the strategic lever. Thermopylae was narrow, only about 50 meters wide in its tightest section. This meant Persia's numerical advantage collapsed. They couldn't deploy 200,000 soldiers into a 50-meter corridor. They had to feed troops in small batches, which meant the Spartans, elite hoplites trained since childhood, faced manageable numbers each wave. For 2 days they held, 2 days, not because they were invincible, they bled and died like any soldier, but because the geography, plus their discipline, forced the Persians into a war of attrition the Persians didn't expect. Each wave that crashed against the Spartan line cost time. Each hour that passed was an hour the other Greek city-states could organize a unified defense. But here's the decision that most people misread. Leonidas learned on day 2 that a mountain path, the Anapaea path, allowed the Persians to flank his position. Once they took that route, the Spartans' defensive advantage evaporated. They'd be surrounded. Death became not a possibility, but a certainty within hours. He could have retreated. Instead, Leonidas ordered most of his force to withdraw, preserving soldiers for future defense, and kept 300 Spartans, plus some allies, to hold the pass one more day. That day cost him and those men their lives. But it cost Xerxes 3 days of momentum, 3 days when Greek generals to the south could gather forces, coordinate strategy, and prepare the naval engagement at Salamis. That naval victory, Salamis, happened weeks later. It broke Xerxes' invasion, and historians widely credit Thermopylae as the psychological and strategic anchor that made Salamis possible. 300 men couldn't defeat an empire, but 300 men choosing to die at the right place, at the right time, could change what the empire faced next. Now, what does this teach us about Stoic defiance? Not that you should seek death. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that Leonidas separated what he controlled from what he didn't. He didn't control whether Persia invaded. He did control whether he fought intelligently, where he chose to stand, and whether he saw his death as meaningless or as a move in a larger game. In modern life, you face the same structure, minus the swords. Your boss makes an unreasonable decision. You can't control that. A market crashes, not your call. A relationship ends, not fully in your hands. But you control whether you panic, whether you retreat in shame, or whether you hold a line of principle even when the outcome is uncertain. The Stoics called this preferred indifference. Leonidas preferred to live, of course, but he was indifferent, unmoved by the fact that his preference couldn't be guaranteed. So he pivoted. He asked, given that I might die anyway, what's the highest value choice I can make? That reframing is everything. When you're overwhelmed by debt, by a failed project, by rejection, your instinct is to optimize for comfort. But Leonidas teaches us to optimize for meaning. He couldn't change Persia's invasion. He could change whether his death was a speed bump or a turning point. That's agency. That's where courage lies. The numbers matter here. 300 soldiers, 100,000 enemies, 3 days of resistance, 1 naval victory weeks later. Xerxes still invaded. Athens still burned. Sparta still lost men, but the trajectory of the war shifted. One choice, made clearly under pressure, moved the needle. Here's what separates Leonidas from panic. He didn't waste energy on what he couldn't change. He didn't rage at the size of Xerxes' army. He didn't bargain or deny. He looked at the geometry of the problem, a narrow pass, 3 days, a fleet to the south, and moved. Decision, action, acceptance of cost. The Stoic power of courageous defiance isn't about winning. It's about not surrendering your judgment to fear. Leonidas was afraid. Any soldier facing 100,000 enemies is. But fear didn't drive his decision. The situation did. The math did. The question of what his death could be worth if spent wisely. So when you're facing your own Thermopylae, a deadline you can't move, a loss you can't undo, a decision where every path costs something, ask Leonidas's question. What's the highest value move I can make with what I actually control? Not how do I win? You might not. But how do I make this count? 300 Spartans died at Thermopylae. They lost. The empire won the battle. But they won something larger. They proved that defiance, chosen clearly and paid for fully, can shift what comes next. That's not mythology. That's strategy. And it's available to you every time you choose to hold a line when holding it costs something real. Subscribe to get weekly breakdowns of how ancient decisions shape modern resilience. Because the best strategy is always rooted in clear thinking, not blind hope.